I'm Corrine Morey, having a conversation here with Adam Walker, who is a MLA in the Parksville Qualicum area. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so we're going to have a discussion tonight because he has the unique perspective of being an MLA in both settings, one under a political party and then one acting as an independent. So that has its own story. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you wandered into this environment where you've had both experiences?
Yeah, I guess a little background on who I am. I served as a councillor in the town of Qualicum Beach for 2 years, and then we saw the election during COVID pop up with a very short election period, and I was actually trying to get somebody else to get their name forward. Somebody had committed to running, and it was kind of a crazy time during COVID, and she wasn't able to get the paperwork in. She had cold feet, and sort of last minute they threw me in as a candidate, and I was told by the party, "Oh, don't worry, you're not going to get elected." And it was a hard campaign because you wanted to knock on doors, you wanted to have those one-on-one conversations with people, but obviously with the different measures around the public health situation at the time, you couldn't do anything. And so I found myself being elected as an NDP member, one of 58, I think, at the time, going down to Victoria in a big empty building that people were told it was too unsafe for even elected officials to all be gathering all at one point. And it was a very strange time. I mean, you go from being a town councillor when you can speak your mind, you go to a council meeting, you read your agenda a few days in advance, you talk to the community. And when you go into that meeting, as an elected official, you just say what's on your mind and you represent the voice of your community. And then finding yourself in Victoria, and it's a very different feel, right? Like you are told this is the initiative of government, this is the policy we're going. There's a little bit of opportunity for input, but for the most part, things are pretty baked in. And then you find yourself as the spokesperson for your party in your community, and you always sort of tell yourself, on balance, this is good. This is good for the community. Well, I'll take this one on the chin, knowing that we're doing some other good things somewhere else. And I went along with that. Everybody, it's the machine that you're in, and so went along with that for 3 years. And it was honestly, it was a very informative, and it's a great time in my life. John Horgan was a very unique leader. Even those that didn't like the NDP, they looked at Horgan and said, well, he gets me. I could have a beer with him. And he's a great guy. Like he mentored all of us, and he was there to provide guidance and support. But again, it was, party comes first. And then a bit of a tumult in my office. I had a staff person, it's a unionized environment, had a staff person that we had some challenges with. And the Premier and I had very different understandings of what is acceptable behavior for staff in an office. I'm a small business person myself. I know exactly what I would feel and what the public would feel is appropriate. And so then I found myself as an independent member. In the last 6 months, I've been an independent MLA, and it's been really, really interesting. You got to sit through the caucus meetings, know what was coming, know what policies are going to really fit with your community, and know which policies are going to be a real challenge. And so for us here in Parksville Qualicum, the 4-to-1 zoning with Bill 44, we need housing. We all recognize we need housing. But when you live in a community of predominantly single family homes, the infrastructure is already in the ground. And now we're saying, okay, you might have to tear that up to put some more homes at the end of the line. It just doesn't really make sense in a small community like this one. But the big one for this community was the short-term rental changes, trying to ban short-term rentals to try to free up that housing stock. I think it's an initiative that in its foundation made sense, in the sense that anything we can do to free up more housing, let's tackle this. But we've seen the shift between when Horgan was premier, when Eby's premier, is he likes to see himself as a man of action, which I think British Columbians, some will see as that's what we need in a leader. But when you're making big policy decisions without talking to tourism industry, without talking to local government, without talking to even the people who got you elected, it creates some real challenges. And so in our community, we were very close to losing 300 hotel rooms on Resort Drive. It's the heart of the tourism space in Parksville here. And it was it was 6 months of working with property owners and advocates and the housing minister, and at the end we managed to get it done right. But it was a whole lot of angst for the community that probably could have been done with consultation in the beginning. I'm sort of meandering on it. I feel like we got to do a bit more rapid fire back and forth.
Okay, so one question I have is, we hear a lot, and I'm not sure if it's just propaganda that the political parties are putting out there so that they can retain control of the whole political environment. But there's lots of, independents don't have any power. Their votes don't really count. You don't get a say. There's really like nothing that you can do to contribute to actually change what's happening for your constituency. And I mean, the little bit that I've spoken with you, it seems to me that you don't have that same opinion. Uh, would you mind telling us, just as truthfully as possible, do you really feel that the independent role actually does have power and influence? Or do you feel like there is a lot of restrictions that you really can't navigate around?
Um, I guess if you asked any premier that was in a majority government, they would say that not only do independents have no power, but opposition has no power. I mean, they could argue the fact that when they have a majority, what they say goes. And for the most part, that we see government running ahead, moving forward, and sometimes not listening to opposition. But it's not the case at all. Independents have, in many ways, a lot more flexibility than they do in a political party. So when Bill 44 came forward, I knew that was going to impact our community. I spoke with the mayors, I spoke with community advocates, spoke to people in the housing industry that pointed out significant problems. And I was able to speak to that legislation more than any other MLA in the House, except for the housing minister that's at the other side responding, of course. And so that's a power that if you're in the governing party and you have legislation coming forward that's going to impact you in a negative way, you're not allowed asking questions. You're given this sort of, not a script, but a box to work within, and that's your message box, and you got to sort of steer within that those confines. As an independent, you go down there and you get to speak for your community. You're not putting the party first. You're not putting the premier first. You're putting your community first. It's not about you. It's about your community. So some of the things that are a little different between an independent MLA and just a traditional MLA. For example, my office budget, I now have basically double the resources that I did before. And so that's to be able to affect policy change and to support the work that I'm doing as an independent, to hold government to account. And what that means is in my office, instead of having 2 people that were run off their feet, I now have 5 people in my office. Some of them are part-time, but we're able to do things that we were never able to do before. We keep that separation, the caucus and the CO budget, but we're able to help local nonprofits with grant writing. We hear all the time that nonprofits are having a real struggle getting volunteers. Government saying there's a big pot of money, you just have to apply for it. Well, our community got 2 major housing projects early after the election. We haven't applied for any others because the nonprofits in this community they're tapped out. They don't have the resources. And so now we're working with those nonprofits to get those housing applications forward. And those applications are not adjudicated by politicians, they're not adjudicated by the party. The best application gets the funding. So this idea that I mean, there is some funding that does flow, within the party for political reasons, but most of the traditional grants that we see, like the big housing projects, health initiatives, those are not political. It's about the best application you have forward. So we're trying to do what we can to build up nonprofits. We had identified 2 Ukrainian doctors in our community when I was in the party, and it just killed me inside. You have this anesthesiologist and a gynecologist. So 2 specialists, years of experience in Ukraine. They come here and they're working reception. They're making a little more than minimum wage. When I was in the party, I took that contact to the ministry and said, we got to figure this out. This is not right that we've got 2 fully trained doctors in our community that they can't get their credentials recognized. And so it died. Like, it didn't go anywhere. The party didn't do anything with it. And so now we're able to use the resources of our office we've identified 6 different international graduates in our community, and we're helping them go through that process of get their credentials recognized. get into residency, and then ideally start practicing in this community. So,
So
you know,
can you
there's
tell me
yeah,
the actual logistics of how, because you were independent, you got double the funding? Can you give more
yeah.
details on that?
So as an MLA, you're granted, I don't remember the exact amount, but it's the equivalent that would be required to hire two full-time equivalents in your office. So that's your sort of constituency office funds. It's about 160 grand a year, something like that. When you're independent, you get basically the exact same amount, maybe a little more on top of that, to help support that you're working, the work you're doing to support the community in Victoria from a policy perspective. And there's a ton of overlap, right? Constituency work and the policy work, there's overlap there. And so we're able to take advantage of the fact that we have this additional opportunity to better serve this community. Like we've got 12,000 people without a doctor in this community, and we're not a big community, you know, 45,000 people, and they're predominantly seniors.
Can you tell us a bit, like you and I have
Yeah.
chatted a bit about the project that your community is working on with trying to have a locally owned and
Yeah.
managed health center. Give us some details on that.
Yeah, so we have put together a business plan, a financial plan, worked with some folks to get a floor plan laid out. We're probably, I keep saying a week and a half. It feels like I've been saying that for a while now, but we're very close to presenting that to the nonprofit, who will then hopefully make that public. And that provides a vehicle for the community to come together around the idea of a community-owned community health center. So this is, we've changed the design of it. It's got 16 exam rooms. The idea is a team-based practice where we can bring existing doctors in the community to set up, move in. We know that a lot of them are retiring in the next 2 or 3 years. And so that provides an opportunity for them to ease into retirement and to build a team-based environment for family medicine in this community. Government has, they went through the PCN, and 5 years ago, they came up with a plan. Things have changed in the last 5 years, and government is just not nimble enough to be able to hear from people here and sort of pivot to be able to deliver for folks here in this community.
And
And
so
so we've been
you
able
found
to,
a way then for local communities to own and manage their own health center, but it still is being publicly funded, so paid for with public dollars.
it's a lot of it's going to be just fundraising, right? Like, so the concept is to have local governments buy the building, hold it for a few years, and then sell it back to the society at cost. That way, local governments aren't out of pocket any cash. The community comes together on the capital end for the leasehold improvements, and then Island Health, like when you're a doctor in a community, your health authority often has resources to help you deliver healthcare. So they will provide often a nurse or a nurse pharmacist or a dietitian, but most of these docs don't have room for these people. And so we're in this awkward situation where government is creating good policy, but in communities like ours that aren't set up for it, it just doesn't get delivered to people here. And it's unfortunate because the community has no idea. So when I was in the NDP, I would ask how many people are on this Health Connect registry. That's the list that is rolling out province-wide to sign up for a doctor. When that list first launched here, I was told, don't tell anyone about it. Make sure your community isn't aware of that list, because we don't want too many people signing up at once. And then after a year, we were trying to figure out how many people are on this list, and we were not given those numbers. We had to go around government. This is when I was in the NDP, had to go around government and then talk to the PCN, talk to different people in the community and say, hey, do you know what the number is? And now we figured out we just do FOIs for everything. We have at any given time 2 or 3 FOIs in, and that information is then available to everybody. And so now we know in a given month, we've got anywhere from 200 to 500 people signing up for a doctor. And every month we have 2 to 5 people getting attached with a doctor. Like it is going in a very, very bad direction here. So if I was
So,
not independent, I wouldn't be able to do this.
do you ever get any pushback, like from, so you're on the island, you would be working with Island Health Authority. Do you foresee that they would put up any obstacles in terms of having to relinquish control over the administration of delivering healthcare? So if a community, or if communities across BC started initiating this kind of structure where the communities owned the building, they decided who they wanted to hire, can you foresee that health authorities would put up obstacles for that?
They like it. I mean, they know just as much as everyone else in this community that we've got real problems, and so they're doing what they can to support local practices and community. So like they add funding for, like I said, you want a nurse. If you got two docs in a clinic, the health authority here, they want to give you a nurse to make sure that you're able to look after those patients well. They'll have dietitians and other types of specialists. So they are already working with these, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit clinics. This community health center model, it is a very common model in more rural parts of our province because the province just can't, you can't set a policy in Victoria that delivers care in some of these small communities. And so we've seen that through the Gulf Islands. I met with some folks from Salmon Arm last summer that are doing some work around that area. On Sunshine Coast, parts of this province that just aren't able to be centrally managed. The community steps up and they do creative things. Sometimes they'll put a dentist in the same office as a doctor, in the same office as a pharmacist, and then you got a great team-based system there.
Okay, there is one thing I need to clarify for sure here. So currently right now, I just actually saw a news article today up in northern BC. I believe it was Chetwynd, and massive critical shortages for healthcare staff. And Adrian Dix going, this is terrible. We can't sustain this, while he continues to block the terminated healthcare workers because of the mandates from the system. Now, do you see any issues if these community constructed health units want to hire staff that the health authorities themselves wouldn't hire? Do they have leverage that they could block funding over that?
Yeah, the health authorities have that power. So when you come in as a nurse in like my wife's a registered nurse, and so I hear about the challenges in healthcare every day. But if you're a registered nurse that is being supplied by the health authority to a clinic, that's an Island Health employee or a health authority employee. So those mandates that would be provincially directed that apply to the health authorities would limit that. There are some, like we've got a clinic that's some for-profit institution is setting up in this community where they're looking to hire nurse practitioners directly. And as long as it's not a college requirement, it's likely that they would be able to work in that model. But that's a model where people are being asked to pay anywhere from $40 to $140 a month to get access to healthcare. And so it's permissible. My understanding is it's permissible under our current structure, but it certainly will create some inequities in this community because we got lots of seniors that $140 a month would be the difference between eating and getting a doctor, and that would be just a disaster.
So is that because they're setting it up under like a membership?
They're doing it as a membership model. Yeah, so they won't deal with MSP at all. They're using that system.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. What
It's a
is
whole other one to unpack is what
I
that looks
know.
like. Yeah.
Well, and it's important because I mean the way that healthcare is currently being delivered in this province, it is falling apart because of the BC NDP's decisions on how they are administrating these services. And in the last few years, since they've taken over the management of these health authorities, they obviously are not doing a very good job. So we've got some big challenges. I mean, for an example, here in Nelson, we're under Interior Health, but Interior Health runs all the way up to Williams Lake. I was speaking with a nurse that's in the emergency here. And so Williams Lake is so short-staffed that they're sending shift call-outs out here to Nelson.
Oh, wow.
And nurses are taking them on their day off because they are getting paid double time to travel, double time to work, and accommodation. And then they call in sick for their shifts here. And then they have to be called out double time to fill those shifts here. So one shift is costing the taxpayer minimum 6 times the amount. And that's just poor management. And that is something that's not an isolated incident. This is the kind of administration that is going on all over this region. So there are some pretty straightforward analysis that you can do and look at how things are being run. And if it was the private sector, there'd be no doubt that these contractors would have been kicked off the job a long time ago.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a real challenge. I can't imagine driving 9 hours for a shift after you've already pulled, it could be 48 hours at that point and then having to drive. I mean, the challenges we see in healthcare, we're seeing it in every province across this country. We're seeing it around the world, but there's room for improvement. When I talk to people who are, once they've got their cancer diagnosis and the screening and they've got their appointment, that whole process is hell for a lot of people. But once they're in the system, once they're connected with an oncologist and a surgeon and they get their date and their time, we have some of the best care that you could expect anywhere in the world. But the gaps that are broken, we need to work together as a community to identify those and just fix them. I mean, some of them are not insurmountable. In our community, it's just not having access to a family doctor. If people had that, they could get their tests and the referrals and get on to the next step. But there's some real problems that need to get fixed. But I think whichever party you have in Victoria, it doesn't matter what it is. I think we're still going to need to find solutions in our community because every community is different, right? Like Nelson is very different than Williams Lake. I mean, that's the drive you're talking about, which is very different than here. And so communities need to be more, have a little bit more autonomy as far as making those investments and decisions in healthcare.
What are some other things that you're experiencing firsthand that as an independent, you are seeing that actually is a beneficial system?
Yeah.
Is there other
Yeah.
things you could tell us about?
I mean, yeah, any provincial element you could bring something up, but I mean, I guess today meeting with some small business owners in our community with the challenges with the street disorder we see. Parksville and Qualicum are, by all measures, safe places. There's very little impact with unhoused populations, those with substance use disorders. They're great. It's a great place to call home. But we have in Parksville and in Qualicum some individuals, a small number, that are creating a very outsized burden on our community, on our small business community. And I was talking to someone who mentioned a small business owner in Parksville. 5 times in one day, the same individual went in, stole from the store, $100 each time, goes out, owner phones the cops say, well, we can't do anything about this. And it just repeats. There's no consequences for the behavior. And so if I was in the governing party, I'd listen to that and I'd bring it to government and I'd raise it up, but I wouldn't be able to truly empathize with the people going through this. When you're in opposition and somebody tells you a horrible story, you can agree with them and say, government's dropped the ball on this. If we have an RCMP detachment that is concerned about bringing charges forward because of a provincial policy, we need to address that. And you just got to cut through some of the nonsense sometimes and just say it as it is. And when you're in a party and you're worried about how your caucus chair or the comms team is going to think about what you say, it really does limit your ability to represent your community. So I mean, that's a perfect example. So we can talk to small business owners, go to the mayors, go to the RCMP in a nonpartisan way and just say, what do we have to do to get to the bottom of this? And if it requires housing, let's figure it out. If it requires more treatment, let's figure it out. But it takes the politics out of it, I guess, is the best part of all of this being independent.
Yeah, I actually did hear from people who are in the sector that is trying to provide care for the population that is on the streets and doing a lot of the shoplifting, is that sometimes it's intentional, because if they want to get clean, the only way they can do that is if they're incarcerated for a long enough time that they have the rehab in there. Otherwise, there's no way to access it out in the community.
Yeah. This guy went into one of our local financial institutions and was prodding staff, telling them to hit him so that he could get arrested and get put in jail so he could get dinner that night. I can't think of a better example of a broken system. Some poor staff person who's just trying to do their job, they got their own struggles at home they have to deal with, and they go to work and they're being verbally accosted by someone who literally just wants to get arrested so that they can get access to a meal and a place to sleep. Like it's broken, and there's no other way to describe it.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and you may or may not want to be honest about it. You've been sitting in legislature for the last few years.
Yeah.
The people that are on this call are here because by and large, they don't have much trust in our provincial system right now, and the way that the political parties are making decisions, the amount of money that is being spent, and the lack of services that we're getting for it. There's a lot of concern over the DRIPA Act and the potential of even more removal of our rights and access to our independence. Do you honestly think that it's possible that we could fix this system, knowing that it's not going to happen in a few years and it will have to be this long-term plan? Or are we really too far gone that the amount of money that has been spent and the decisions that have already been legislated, is it something that is too far gone?
So I guess first the trust issue. I hear that from a lot of people. They feel that politicians are there to serve themselves, right? Like we hear this all the time. A member of the legislature switched to a different party, and the first thing is, oh, they're just doing it for the pension. No, I don't know many politicians in Victoria that are there, for the pay. It's what is it, 7:30 at night? My first meeting this morning was 7:30 this morning. Most people wouldn't sign up for that. But there is a problem there. People feel that they're not being heard. And I think that the challenge with that is we look at everything in our day-to-day lives. People here who don't have a doctor, people who are struggling to pay their mortgage or their rent, cost of food's just completely out of whack. You've got street disorder where it's creating an impact on you, but then also you point to some of the folks that are on the street that have better access to healthcare and services than even we do as tax-paying citizens. There's a lot of challenges in the world right now, and when you have politicians that are trying to put a sugar coating on it and say everything's fine, we're just we're people of action, and we're going to build homes for people, and look at all the money we spent. People feel really disconnected. They don't feel like people are in Victoria fighting for them. And so I totally empathize with that. And I take the time in my office to try to hear people out when they bring whatever concern it is. Because, the fact, it's easy for some people to say, oh, that person's crazy. No, they're not. Everybody has their own truth, and you just have to take the time to hear people out. And I don't think there's enough of that. As far as
Some of the things that I see is more systemic. So we have this huge increase in the size of government over the last 6 years. We have in every ministry or every office, we have more and more people that have been hired that have not actually been mentored well. And from what I understand of people who have been inside the ministries, when the pandemic started, most of the experienced workers that were knowledgeable about the system were close to retirement age left. And then you have all of these government workers who ended up working from home for at least 2 years. And the way to learn all the complexities and intricacies of how government works, it has to be done with other people. You can't learn it sitting at home by yourself. And I myself, in the last month, have made several calls to different parts of government. Today, I was speaking with corporations, BC corporations, trying to get information. Talked to several people, and nobody that I spoke to had any idea of any of the questions that I asked, and had to keep going to the next person. And so, and this is not uncommon. I have encountered this with the Ministry of Municipalities, BC elections. I've had to over time and time again to get things in writing because I'm always given wrong information. And so the actual competency of what is functioning in our government, just as the service level, is very poor. And anyone who has interacted enough with those layers will discover that very quickly. So it's not just a matter of elected officials and listening to the people, it's that our very institutions are compromised. The government systems are not working well because people who are working there don't even know their own jobs. We have a legal system that is dragging out decisions so long that we cannot keep our systems working well because there's no decisions that are coming through in a quick enough time, where we have infiltration of our education system with ideologies, and we're not actually getting students that are coming out with a great education. I mean, even just trying to explain to people the fact that we have 3 levels of government: federal, provincial, and municipal. Most people don't understand that. We have done a very poor job of explaining government and politics and just fundamental basic understanding of what our societies need in order to function together, and it's not there. So I am not sure that what we have actually in place for our government is functional. Please tell me otherwise.
Yeah, there's lots to unpack there. I mean, I guess one of the things to do is always contrast what we're doing here relative to other jurisdictions. I was talking to somebody recently who's trying to sell land in India, and you think our land title system is a little cumbersome. It is absolutely bonkers the way that the land transfer like you're paying people to pay people, and like it's like, so our system is not perfect. I think fundamentally there's a couple truths there to unpack. One is, when you run an $8 billion deficit, and a lot of that is an operating deficit, if you're going to borrow a bunch of money to build a hospital, I think people get that. You're going to amortize that over a long time. And the people who are paying today and the people who pay, 50 years from now, when that debt's done, they're all getting use of that hospital. But when you're paying the nurses and the doctors today with dollars from our kids and our kids' kids, that's fundamentally broken. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at. Government needs to be financially sustainable. Like, we can't just keep doing what we're doing, throwing money at it, hoping it'll fix itself. But the other thing you mentioned is your interactions with government. I've had lots of really positive interactions with different ministries and different staff, and I've had lots of really negative interactions with some of the public service. And I think if you measure what you want to see succeed, whether it's call times, how long does it take to get an answer? How long does it take to get, like physically answer the phone? If we measure these things, we can point to, this is the way it was today, and this is our target of where we're trying to get to. We can fix those things. Those things are solvable, but we're going to have to do a big audit of the way government works. If we're going to get that $8 billion deficit down to zero, we're going to have to rely on some of those new hires, some of those people who've been in government a long time, and ask them, how are we going to fix this? My stepdad worked for TELUS. They'd always be bringing these new managers in with these new bright ideas, and those people would never talk to the workers. And they'd always get some new policy or some new, way of doing things that always made life a little harder for these people who are just trying to do the job. But when you talk to the boots on the ground, the sort of, the grunts that have been there for a few years, they get their job. Most of these people have a good idea of what they need to do in their job and what they need to see to fix the environment. The thing we need to do is listen to those people and actually act on what they recommend, because we can't just keep hiring $300,000, $400,000 managers or deputy ministers and say, get a new one in and maybe that'll solve the problem. It needs to start from the ground up. It can't start from the top down.
Okay, so in terms of actually being able to influence these kinds of structures, could you give a comparison to us of what your power level and mechanisms that you could have used as a party member versus what you have now as an independent? Is it pretty equal, the same? Do you feel like you had more say under the NDP? What's your perspective on that?
I guess you have different goals. When you're in a political party and when you're in government, your job is to minimize risk to the party. So we've had issues in this area with conservation officers. not getting back quickly enough on things. Our CO locally, he's an awesome guy. He's great. I've talked to him, 7 in the morning after I got attacked by a deer. He followed up and just, how you doing? And I had an incident with a bear, and phoning me at 9 o'clock at night to figure it out. So like our CO is good. But so when you're in a party and there's someone in the news, because like we've got this cougar incident that's taking place right now, where this cougar is picking off this farmer's sheep. He's kicked 5 of them off right now. When you're in a party, you go out there and you say, the party's invested in 3 new conservation officers across the whole province. We're working, we're hearing about the challenges, and this is how we're delivering results. And so you got this message. Doesn't mean anything to anybody. In opposition or as an independent, I guess if you're in opposition, you're going to want to live in the box of, we have 5 key issues we're going to bang every single day, whether it's housing, affordability, street disorder, decrim, whatever it is. And that's where the opposition communications department goes. When you're an independent, all of a sudden you can start doing FOIs on the local conservation team. You can start directly liaising with some of this at a staff level. What is the problem at this level? And then advocate for those changes, both through the media, through grassroots in the community, and then going to the minister directly. So it allows you to be a lot more flexible with issues that actually matter to people in this community that wouldn't matter to opposition, and definitely don't matter when you're in a governing party. I don't know if that answered. I feel like I'm a politician. I feel like I'm talking for 2 minutes and didn't actually give you an answer.
And you find that as an independent, when you put out the FOIs, do you get this information quickly? And
oh yeah,
okay.
There's a legal requirement for you to get it within 2 months or whatever the timeline is. So yeah, we get it. We disseminate it in a way that makes the most sense for advocacy purposes. We only just started this a couple months ago, so we're just learning through this process. There are lots of tools that, whether you're outside of government, in government, like the general public or MLAs, whether you're in opposition or an independent, there are a lot of tools there. And you just need to know how to use the levers and spin the dials. And so we're starting to really learn some of the power that we have in this role to be able to get information, get it out there, and really shape the narrative about what is not working in community.
So at local government level, regional districts run with directors and representatives from municipalities who are all directors. Each of these directors comes to the table representing their own community. Mm-hmm. They come as an independent. They do not come with a political party. And my observation of these dynamics is they all sit around the table and they hash out solutions, and there is no interference from a political party in that director being able to represent their region. Mm-hmm. From what I see, it works quite well. I'm surprised that all of a sudden now, when it comes to provincial levels of government, there's this story that all of a sudden, no, this doesn't work. I can't understand that. What would be the message that you would give to the population in terms of, from your experience, what would be the best structure that should be functioning at a provincial government level to ensure that there is representation?
I'm a strong believer of coalition governments. Maybe not the federal government's maybe not the best example, but the idea of multiple parties and multiple individuals working together, having to go back to their community, not just every election time, but to really come to agreement around core issues, get that done, and then renegotiate, and then just keep reserving that mandate. I mean, what we have right now in BC is this pendulum that goes back and forth. And after, whether it's 12 years or 16 years or 8 years, we'll point to a party and say, like the line that the NDP always likes to use is 16 years of Liberal inaction, or 16 years of Liberal whatever. It shouldn't be this pendulum where we just point and try to make the other person out to be the bad guy. Like, every government has done good things, every government has done bad things. We should be working together. When government brought forward that bill to try to, what was it? It was a business bill to try to add the ability to sue a business for harm or something. The idea was to target social media companies like Facebook, when, like, that horrible story of that young child from northern BC who ended up taking his own life. So government introduces this bill, and that's a perfect example of opposition doing their job. They talked to the business community, they got legal advice, And they pointed out to government that this is just fundamentally the wrong way to take action on this thing they were trying to solve. And government responded to that. They recognized, yes, they overstepped. Yes, they didn't consult. And so they just didn't bring that bill forward any further. Just like with the Land Act changes, the province said, we're going to bring forward in the spring session transformative changes to the Land Act. There wasn't consultation. There wasn't this forum for people to have a fundamental conversation about what it means to be a British Columbian, what it means to be Crown, what does it mean for this land. And they made the announcement, and lo and behold, the community got around it, the opposition got around it, and government responded. Government should be nimble. Like, that should be a moment where government says, we did the right thing. We didn't build that museum because people told us we didn't want it. Like, we need to see more of that. And I think you'll get a more balanced government. I think you'll get a more relatable government. The more you have different parties able to work together to try to make sure we represent people effectively. So in my perfect world, for me, you'd have a coalition of those parties. Some of those parties still exist, but to have some other MLAs there that are independent, fighting for their community, I think it adds to the conversation in a really, really good way.
Thank you. Lorene, do you have a few questions that are ready to go?
We don't have a lot. There's quite a few comments, but there's one good question relating to something that Adam said not too long ago. What would it take to get a functional audit, keyword functional, to cut excess and streamline processes? And I'll just add to that. I mean, audits tend to be, when they are done by a government on themselves, they tend to be a bit meaningless. So just what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we have an auditor general that's independent, and he does a pretty good job. The challenge will be to do a full audit on all government spending. Could take 4 years to complete, and that wouldn't necessarily provide any value for anyone. I think the first step is government needs to be held to account for spending. There is no reason outside of a provincial emergency that our operating deficit should exist. We should be paying down the debt. And see a question, I don't know if I'm supposed to be responding as they come in. Could it be done by department? Yeah, but I don't think politicians should be involved in that process. I think politicians should come to agreement and say, this is our budget. Whether it means we're going to raise taxes to cover that $8 billion or cut spending by $8 billion or somewhere in between, we need to come to an agreement that this is what we're going to work within. And then every ministry needs to figure out how they're going to be able to deliver their role as a ministry within that funding. The idea is not that you get 93 MLAs running around in different ministries trying to come up with ideas to cut funding. Like we talked before, you talk to those people that have been there for 2 years, 4 years, or better still, the ones that are just nearing retirement. Ask them where the waste is. Ask them what can be improved. But if you do it at a policy level higher up, and we just say, this is the new framework that we're working in, the ministries will figure it out. There's a lot of really good staff in those ministries. We just have to be honest with the general public. This is, it will impact the level of service. It will impact taxation. We're going to come to this agreement and just get it done.
So when you say governments need to be held to some accountability, how practically does that look? How do you create?
I think we're seeing that right now. I think we have this October a lot of people who have pointed to a lot of different provincial files that are worse off than they were 7 years ago. And through this election, people will be able to put that voice out there. I think the deficit is definitely something, at least in this community, that people are talking about. The idea that the debt service payments are going to become sort of a ministry upon itself, that's how large it is. People here, they don't buy that. They don't think that's acceptable at all. And so I'm hoping that through this election, conversations like that will come forward, and whatever government we land with will listen to people of the province.
So you haven't been able to actually identify a mechanism where financial accountability could actually be implemented? Because I mean, what I'm seeing is more and more is that the government is giving civil servants immunity from any kind of repercussions for their role in decisions that impact the public. So I'm seeing the opposite of accountability. I'm seeing that decisions can be made and there is no consequence at all for that. So I'm just curious. I mean, we talk about accountability, but I'd sure like to know, is there a strategy to implement that accountability?
I think the first step is bringing back all the provisions of we used to have a law in British Columbia called the Balanced Budget and Ministerial Accountability Act. And that meant that if your ministry did not maintain its budget, if it ran a deficit, you as a minister took a pay cut, a fairly sizable pay cut. And that was removed with very little political pushback. And it's unfortunate because there should be consequences. I get it. If Mike Farnworth is out there and all of a sudden we've got a forest fire year that's, $1 billion, that's pretty hard to budget for. But if every ministry is running, or as a government as a whole is running a deficit, there needs to be consequences for the ministers that are making those decisions. It is too easy to say yes to everything and find yourself in an $8 billion hole, and there's no accountability for the cabinet that's involved in making that budget. And so I would think first step is bringing back the provisions that were brought in originally, that puts consequences to the ministers.
Adam, if you were premier, what are 3 things, and you had the magic wand that you could change three things that were going on in this province right now? What would you choose?
Healthcare is fundamentally broken for way too many people in this province. I think it's not that there's a lack of spending. I think there's a lack of local autonomy in the way healthcare is delivered. And so by working with health authorities and giving power to regional districts. So right now, regional districts pay for 40% of the capital. You want to put a hospital in, you go to your local government and they pay 40%. If your hospital has a furnace that breaks, you go to your local government and they pay 40% to replace the capital of that furnace, but they have absolutely no say in where that money goes. They don't get to pick which items show up on the list. They just get a bill that they have to fill out. And so I think fundamentally healthcare, that model, I think by giving more power to local government with the funding, but also with primary care and community, you have local nonprofit clinics that are getting set up with government funding. And because of that, you have private investors not investing in local clinics because they're afraid the government's going to come in and build a clinic in their community and they're going to be out $1 million in leasehold improvements. That funding, if that was standardized where communities could apply just like they do for housing, for primary care investments in their communities, no political games involved, but just local government has the power working with some sort of a health body to make those investments. I think that would solve a lot of the primary care issues that we see in housing. You can't have 10,000 people showing up every month. And, we had a record of 7,000 new housing starts in 1 month. That's still a 3,000 house shortfall. And so government has the power to build new communities. I don't know why they're not. They should be using some of this crown land to put new communities in, just put the hospital in, put the schools in, gazette the rest for growth, and just get out of the way. The private sector can build the homes if they have the land to do it on in an economic way. But they could also leverage, BC Housing. They do all these projects as one-offs. They build this housing project here, this housing project there. If BC Housing went to public tender and said, we're going to build 40,000 homes over the next 10 years, we want one company to put a bid in for modular construction that's built somewhere in the province with BC Wood, and we're going to give them a runway of 10 years, I got to think the cost to build those homes is going to come down substantially. And that would certainly help BC Housing get things built. And then, with the disorder we see in the streets, we need to figure out how to get people into treatment. I met with a woman a year ago who was trying to get her son help. He was on the wait list for Redfish Healing Center. She actually went to a judge, had him admitted under the Mental Health Act, and he was released 8 hours later. This is a broken system. The tools are there, but we need to make sure that there's a system in place, and it doesn't have to be government running this. You can get nonprofits, you can get small for-profit corporations and community providing mental health supports for people. People need and deserve the help to get through these difficult times. And those would be my 3 focuses for sure. Fixing primary care, fixing healthcare, and then fixing the mental health situation that we have. And then as far as affordability, I think if we can get the housing situation fixed, I think people will see that groceries start becoming more affordable because labor costs can become more affordable.
I'm always curious why, with all the focus on housing, it seems that the attention and the resources are being put into creating housing where it keeps people in this perpetual enslavement as a tenant. I had a few conversations with management of credit unions and lending institutions and mortgage brokers. curious as to why there isn't more focus put on rent-to-own solutions. I mean, we have a local wood manufacturing company here that is doing a big mass timber business. They had land provided for them by one of the local cities, and they're doing a lease to purchase option. So they'll be making lease payments for 3 years. And each one of those payments are going to go towards the purchase price. So I certainly find it interesting that business is able to access these kinds of programs, and yet there is nothing being given to the public, because the first thing we know is that the more that you ensure that your average middle class person cannot grow equity, then you have a redistribution of wealth. And then you have, you know, I'm always wanting to sort of include the private sector into providing services that should be provided by the private sector. We don't need government providing everything. But what I am concerned about is the monopoly. And so what I'm seeing now is the Columbia Basin Trust is partnering up with a certain corporation in this area. They're creating all sorts of different housing units, but what they're actually creating is buildings that have a guaranteed customer base for the rest of their lives, because there's no option for BC residents to actually purchase these units. So how about we change the plan so that we can actually put equity back into people's pockets, rather than making sure that big corporations are getting these nice little rental payments every year for the rest of forever.
Well, it's not only the rental payments. I mean, there's ongoing subsidies through BC Housing whenever one of these units gets built. So it works out to be very, very large amounts of money. I think it comes down to sort of a fundamental philosophy, contrasting two different governments. You know, under the previous government with the BC Liberals, we saw a lot of public-private partnerships. Some of them worked out great. Some of them worked out terrible. Like, some of them for the taxpayer represented just the absolute worst possible deal. But some of them worked out really well. In our community, we have a long-term care facility run by a nonprofit that is able to deliver care to seniors. That's where my grandmother is, for something like 40% less than the health authority can. And they deliver a much higher quality care than the health authority can. And so with housing, the idea that the province has to build housing, I mean, the province will always have to build housing, but the idea that the province itself is going to build us out of this housing crisis is an absolute folly. The idea that we throw $1 billion or $2 billion and say that's a big amount of money. Well, it is a big amount of money. But the fact is that you look at the housing market as a whole, and you're looking at trillions of dollars. There's no way that government, federally and provincially, can anywhere near the private market as far as access to capital. And so that's where you have to really give a thought to, how is it that government can bring the cost of housing down? And so that's why I like the idea of BC Housing going in and saying, we're going to pre-buy 40,000 units. It's not about BC Housing owning those units. It's about ensuring that you've got a factory that's able to put these things out. Like, nobody wants to invest $100 million in a new house factory if they are going to be on the hook if that thing doesn't go forward. They need that runway to be able to make those investments. You look at the States and some of the things going on with purpose-built high density homes built in factories, and I think it's in San Francisco, there's an old submarine factory, and they build these houses. It's like an air hockey table, where you got your little rubber puck that's floating around, your plastic puck. They build whole apartment units that float on this thing and go all the way down this conveyor belt from one end to the other. And they build a house, and then they put together a 40-unit apartment building in a weekend. That is the future of housing. It's not going to be to make the ceilings a little shorter to try to save a few bucks, or to or whatever else we can do, make it a little less interesting to save money. We have to change the way that we build. That means less waste, better management of labor, but the private market can do it, but they're not going to take the risk. Like, we've all heard the horror stories from local government. Project gets approved, and then it comes to a development permit period, and council says, well, we changed our mind, we're gonna just knock it down a floor, or can you set it back a little bit from the road? I know we approved it, but like, you need to have certainty there. And I think that that by having some sort of an agreement and a partnership, we did this during the war. It wasn't the government that built all of this stuff that we sent to Europe to try to protect the freedom of the Western world. The government put the money together, they put the policy together, but they let private industry actually do the work. And I think that's the way we're going to have to tackle this housing process, is in essentially the same way.
Do you have any
There's-
concerns
there's-
about the level of
Brightness right now coming through my window? Yes.
you still look great though. Provincial government overreach into local government. So for instance, Emergency Act, with the increased authority that the provincial government has given itself in terms of access and entry into private citizens' residences and assets. Also, the fact that they are trying to download a lot of the responsibility onto local government, of which they do not have the jurisdiction or the money. And as well, even just the Housing Development Act, where basically overriding local communities, telling them that they're already approved for 3 or 4 units on each lot and making public hearings illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any concerns about this level of provincial government moving into the authority of local government?
I mean, those are two good examples. I think the emergency management one, there's concerns raised, and I've heard those concerns about additional powers, and some of that are very well put concerns. But the Emergency Management Act changes also address some of the concerns that local government had, that they didn't have the autonomy, that First Nations didn't have the autonomy to respond to in a timely way under the previous act. That one, at least, I felt that UBCM and some of the local governments were a part of that process. Was it perfect? No. There's challenges. You've raised some. There's other challenges I've heard. You talk to some of the SAR groups around. They were not happy the way that rolled out, and that comes from consultation. But yeah, the way that this housing change rolled out, I don't think it's going to destroy communities. I don't think it's going to lead to, this sort of spread of fourplexes everywhere. But that's also kind of the problem. If the government's solution to the housing is to build fourplexes everywhere and it doesn't happen, that's an issue. But I think fundamentally the challenge is that local government, it's a creature of the province, but they've been given the autonomy and they've been given the power to deliver locally. And when the provincial government steps in and says, we've changed the rules without consulting with any of the elected officials in the process, it creates huge distrust and animosity between levels of government, and it will impede our ability to be able to respond to things like the housing crisis and the opiate crisis and the healthcare crisis. And so, yeah, fundamentally, those changes under with the housing reforms, had they been done in partnership with government, and I think some local governments probably would have been okay with, I don't want 4 units everywhere, but you're going to force this number of units. So why don't we try to do it in these designated areas as opposed to sprawl? I think local governments probably would have been on board. But this idea of this unilateral approach, we're not going to get through these crises if we don't work together. And it's an unfortunate mantra that we have, is a government that's goal is to be seen as taking action as opposed to be seen as working together.
Lorene, go ahead.
So, okay, I got another question in the chat, and then I have a question. Have there been conversations between provincial and federal governments on the impact of dense federal immigration policies and the impact on supply and demand with housing? And then they also relate this to healthcare capacity and the ability to deliver, not to suggest that immigration is bad, but that it can be done better.
Yeah, and I think that's a good caveat. I mean, we look to immigrants to solve some of the challenges we see in healthcare and in the construction industry and trucking industry. So we need these folks to be able to come here. I mean, there is a conversation, and we see it on the 6 o'clock news. We see EB, taking pot shots at Trudeau. We see Trudeau taking pot shots at others. We see in Quebec they were given a bunch of money. The conversations are taking place, but they're not going anywhere. If we're going to bring in 1 million people into this country, there needs to be a plan. I'm not saying that we don't need immigrants, but you can't bring that many people in without impacting the quality of life of people here. And so I think that comes back to, how are we going to house these people? How are we going to house the people here? You know, when you've got people fleeing Ukraine, being displaced, and then they come here and they displace seniors who then find themselves living in their car. Nobody wins in that circumstance. You set up a structure where all of a sudden people are pointing to the immigrants as the problem, which is not helpful. And then you've got seniors and you've got families that are living in cars and buses because they can't afford homes. It's fundamentally broken. And I hope that come October, we're going to have a serious conversation about not how are we going to stop these people from coming, but how are we going to deal with the number of people that are going to keep coming year after year, and what we're going to do to make sure that they are looked after appropriately and that we are looked after appropriately.
Hey, my question is related to, you mentioned a really great sounding idea previously with the Accountability Act and having accountability around budgeting and taking action and results oriented assuming measurements. I'm just curious how you think that in the current government that's sitting, as well as the current structure, how that would work to come in, and if there would be an appetite with sitting MLAs to bring that in. Because I'll give you one example where it seems like accountability is not what MLAs want, and that was there was a trucking company in BC recently. It was earlier this year or late last year. They were trying to achieve an EV truck, like a transport truck. They had the technology, they were doing really well, and they ran into a problem with getting the grant approved, because they found out that in order to get approved, you need to use the same company that has been hired to administrate. And that's a very circular and troubling system. How did that get set up? And we've heard nothing about it being cleaned up or addressed, or any accountability brought to that.
Yeah, when you're talking about trucking industry running into problems, I thought you were going to talk about overpasses. But yeah, the news that we saw with MNP and the challenges that Edison Motor made public on TikTok, I mean, that's a good example of political advocacy well done. You know, you've got an individual who's raised concerns, goes on TikTok, goes viral. It's in question period the next day.
The question,
like, we're not
though, is
right
how did that happen?
Oh, I don't know how that happened.
That's kind of, I don't know what other word to use, but kind of mafia behavior from the government.
It doesn't smell right. I've talked to some folks at MNP, and they're looking forward to, so I guess two parts. The House isn't sitting right now, so what do we do about it? How do we bring forward the Accountability Act? You know, we have a short spring session. Government brought in a fairly large agenda. They had a very narrow time to get it done, and then they invoked closure at the end to just eliminate debate on some very impactful bills. So we are seeing the impact of that. You know, now all of a sudden, now in the media, we're talking about, well, what did we just pass? What is that? So that's a challenge. So one of the things that did come forward that was positive through that session is that we did see the Auditor General was called on by the legislature to do a full audit on that process. I believe there was a request to have it done within a certain time frame, which I think is coming up soon. And so we will hopefully see from the Auditor General full accounting of what took place. You know, what safeguards are in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. Was there anything untoward that took place? It certainly didn't smell good, but my understanding is that MNP did have policies for those barriers. I have no idea how that same person was on both sides of that conversation. But the Auditor General report, as an independent body of the legislature, I think will address a lot of those concerns.
So then my fundamental question again is, how feasible do you think it would be to bring this Accountability Act back? And would that be a priority for you?
It'll certainly be a priority for me. I think anything we can do to ensure that government lives within its means is going to be a top priority. I've got 2 young kids. The last thing I want them to do is to go into the workforce and find themselves working for, not for government, but for the excess spending that I was responsible for and that we're all responsible for right now. I know this is going to be a conversation that's going to be top of mind for folks in October, and just hearing from people at the doorstep, this is a big concern. Yes, we know there's a lot of crises in this province, but the unfettered spending is not how we're going to get out of it, and that in and of itself is a problem. So yes, that's get out there and chat with folks between now and October and make sure that that's a part of the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks.
So I'll just end then with one question. Do you think that government could function better without political parties?
Well, I mean, at one point it didn't have political parties. I'm not sure banning political parties would make sense. I think previously in BC, and I think that's how we got Wacky Bennett, was there used to be an instant runoff vote. You would do preferential ballots. I think that at the very least would be a good start to reforming the way governance takes place. This proportional representation thing, I never got that. You have 3 MLAs that share a large geographic area, and then sometimes you might get some, proportional MLA that might. I don't think that makes sense. I think the idea that you know who your local elected official is and they're working for you. But the way that we vote, I mean, you find that people go to the ballot box and it's not who's their favorite; it's who do they, dislike the least. And we should be in a position where we can say, I like this guy, but he's my number 2. This gal's my number 1. I wouldn't vote for her under the old system because that would be a vote away from something else. I think the idea of having that instant runoff makes the vote count take a little longer, but I think it gives you the opportunity to put, the candidate before the party. And I think you would naturally see parties get smaller. They wouldn't disappear, but then you would have a lot more debate in Victoria. Like the session in Victoria would probably be nearly a full year session. It wouldn't be this thing where you get little fits and spurts because the party's already drafted everything and you just show up to sort of, affirm what's going on. So I think fundamentally we need to change the way that the voting process works to make it more representative of what people want to see in their community as representation. And then whether that's parties or not, leave it up to people. They can, folks are smart. They can figure out what they think will represent them best.
All right, you get the last say. Anything else you want to tell us?
I want to know how things are going for you. You're I know you're knocking on doors, you're hearing from people. I know this is about me, and I should have this line all done up where it's like, but like, how are things going?
Oh, I'm on the Meet the Kareen tour in Kootenay Central. So going to all different communities. The thing that was helpful was over the last year and a half, we've had local community members from all over the region, because my region is quite large. To drive across it, it's about 4 hours versus some areas where, 20 kilometers, you've reached the end. So we've already been monitoring and being present with the regional district meetings. And so in every community, there is already a network created where people are paying attention, and we've got some good communication going on. And so I've been able to reach out to people in these different communities, and they're helping me organize things. So I've got events going around. I'm having discussions with people like yourself, because it's important that we talk to people who are smarter than us, that have some inside information, that have a viewpoint that it's helpful. Because like I said, we tend to get information that is very one-sided, when it's very beneficial to hear from somebody who's been working in both systems, and you might have a different thought on what your power level is and what you've been able to contribute. So I appreciate that you've been able to articulate that to us and let us know, because I think what I am discovering as I'm going door knocking, especially through all the business communities, is I am actually pleasantly surprised to see how many people are informed and concerned about what is going on. I've actually had to do very little education on the concerns that I have had in seeing what's going on with our provincial government. People have taken the initiative to learn and to understand some complex topics. What I'm finding the trouble is that people don't know how to activate some kind of response to it, or how do we shift a correction into place so that this continued, and I'm going to use the word abuse, because it is abuse when you are systematically removing the resources from people through every method of taxation possible. and then dictating to them what they're allowed to do with their own properties. I mean, all of this to me it's abusive. And so people are feeling that. They are feeling the distrust of the government. They are feeling threatened that the government is about to implement something else on them that is going to restrict their independence. And I don't think this is beneficial for any society, that there's this immediate distrust of our leadership, because it right away destroys our ability to be able to work together. I don't know if this generation will actually be able to adjust that feeling of distrust or not. I have to say this, I was surprised that there were so many people that were open to the independent concept. They're realizing that the whole political party system has not been very productive or beneficial for us. And so there is less confidence in that. So I am also curious to see what happens with this fall election. My personal feeling is this one is very pivotal, just because of all of the ideas coming through about the Land Act and First Nations control over Crown land and potential repercussions of this. And these are very, very big topics that a lot of the population has no idea is coming through. And in fact, over the last couple of years, it was only when legislation was passed that we even knew that it was happening, where we weren't given a lot of warning in advance to be able to put up some kind of resistance to it. And so now we're spending a lot of time reacting to things like the Healthcare Professions Act and the fact that the government's trying to take over the directing the Law Society. And, you know, there's a lot of things in play that feel like it's totally out of control what's going on. So I'm very curious to see how the population votes this fall. And that will give us a good reading of what the temperature of the population is, and if this current agenda is going to keep proceeding, or if we have at least enough empowerment within the people that they are willing to push back enough that we can bring some correction to this.
You knock on doors, you talk to people. I mean, there's no smarter person or no better focus group than knocking on 4 or 5 doors. I mean, it really hones your skill and really helps you represent the community. So keep up the great work. I'm always here if you've got questions, and it's going to be a very interesting 4 months, and I look forward to seeing how it all plays out.
Well, and we wish you very much good luck, because I know that you've been one of the most accessible MLAs that I've been able to get to grab. So, and you're like way
My
more
staff hate it. They hate it. Every email, I tell them, every email that goes out, the reply at the bottom has to say, and if you want to meet Adam. And so yeah, but it's important, right? So, but yeah, keep it up, and this has been a great discussion. Hope you guys are all learned lots, and I know I certainly did. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, you're off the hook, Adam. Good night. And anyone else who wants to stay in chat, feel free. Otherwise, thank you, Adam. We'll be in touch.
Sounds great. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.